Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Our guest today, the owner of Jay-Z Media, who's done tons of work across our nation's capital as well as down in the United States with the Memphis Tigers, Jordan Zlomislic, or Jay-Z, as most guys know him. It's a pleasure to chat with you again, man. I'm really glad for us to have the chance to talk about what you've been doing with your journey in terms of shooting for athletes, football, lots of different stuff, man.
Appreciate you having me, and looking forward to talking.
So we were chatting a little bit earlier about just some of the opportunities and the stark differences that you've seen in the U.S. and what got your foot into the door to go down, because I know you've done work with the Memphis Tigers before, not a major university, but still one of substantial size when you think about NCAA Division I football.
Yeah, so actually interesting enough, the connection with the University of Memphis actually came from pretty much my hometown of Ottawa. And it all started obviously when I did everything that I did here in Ottawa previously, doing videography, photography, and also kind of being like a junior reporter of some sort as well. And I did a documentary a couple of years ago. It was called The Journey from the 613. And it covered like stories from players from Ottawa that have gone on to higher levels of football. That could be NCAA, NFL, CFL. And one of the players I interviewed and actually have kept in contact since was actually Akeem Mesidor. He was at West Virginia, and now he's at the University of Miami. And he was actually teammates with Tyler Sumter at West Virginia, who was a punter, but is now a videographer. We call him Sump Did It. That's his tag on Instagram. And last football season, he actually had a job with the University of Memphis as their videographer for the football team. And so just talking to him a little bit, I did an interview about just him doing like highlight tapes and stuff like that last like January. And it was a cool interview, just kind of seeing like what he did as an athlete off the field, because like that's a kind of thing that I like to cover a lot of, just kind of getting those kinds of stories out there, because I feel like a lot of athletes, they're always talked about as athletes, but they don't really get the chance or opportunity to talk about what they do outside of their sports. And he is huge on videos, and like I think he mentioned like he made like Star Wars movies when he was like 7 years old. And like he talked about like how his dad got him all sorts of cameras when he was a kid. And with football being a focus, like he never really got to actually like take video seriously until football was actually over and he had graduated from the universities that he went to, because he went to Troy in Alabama and then West Virginia. But he really picked up video again, so I had to do a little article on like his story of how he got into video and how like he worked video while being an athlete as well. And a couple months later he got the job with Memphis. And I remember, I think I got a call from him that summer, and he asked like, do you want to come down for a couple of games this year? And I said, I've got nothing else planned like for the next year, because I had just graduated high school. And I was planning on taking a gap year just to kind of see what kind of opportunities I can have outside of school, because I didn't really have interest in going to school right away, or like really anytime really, just because like I've never been a school guy. Like in high school, I never enjoyed doing any kind of work. And I always kind of prioritized everything else that I did outside of school while I was even in school. So I didn't know if university would have been like the best route to take right away. So I had planned on going to Memphis in September. And I originally planned, I think 2 weeks or 2 or 3 weeks. And I think it ended up being pretty much 2 months I was there. I was there for, I think, 5 games. And I was able to shoot a couple of their games and then I was able to witness a little bit of the outside atmosphere too. There was Arkansas State University, which is very close by. I went there. Ole Miss. Went down to Mobile, Alabama as well to go see some high school football action. And yeah, it was an overall great experience last year. And like I always thank Tyler to giving me the foot in the door down there, because I know without that opportunity last year, a lot of things that I've been doing since then wouldn't have been possible for sure. So definitely thankful for those kinds of opportunities, and it's definitely made a lot of things, I think, better in my opinion for like what I'm working on right now for JZ Media. It gave me a lot of insight on like how to really go about what I want to do instead of like what I was on track to doing like prior to actually going to the States, because I feel like their sports market as a whole is just a lot bigger than it is here. So I was able to kind of get the opinions of not only athletes, but also just people in the creative industry on what I want to do in my career.
Yeah, you talk about this difference between being in the US versus in Canada. And I think this is related to the idea of goal setting. When people always talk about, oh, dream big, but how do you really know how big you can dream until your eyes and your mind are exposed to it? Especially with going down to the US, like, man, I remember the first time going down to St. Cloud State for a football camp. And I was like, man, this is like a tiny university, whatever. But then I was like, oh, they have 6 gyms and this is bigger than the U of M. And doesn't even register in anyone's mind outside of Minnesota because of how tiny it is. It's like Div 2 or 3 or so, I don't even know. But what really changed for you with going down to the US in terms of the direction that you wanted to take your vision?
I think a lot of it, because like prior to actually going to the States, I was kind of only covering like Ottawa stories. Like that was kind of like my main thing. Like I was Ottawa and then Canadian stories, I should say, as a whole, because I was really covering like stories on athletes that were coming from Canada and like coming from Ottawa as well. Just whether it be like a kid from Ottawa that might be playing high school football in the States, and I wanted to maybe write a story on him, like his success, maybe getting a couple offers, and maybe even like Neville Gallimore, Jesse Luketa, for example, guys that have gone on to the NFL from like my hometown. I felt like that was kind of like my niche for a little bit, just being able to tell those kinds of stories, because I felt like nobody really was telling those stories. But then once I went to the States and I was like introduced to more athletes that had these stories similar to like the guys here in Ottawa or here in Canada, but they're Americans. And like there's also like people from other countries as well. Like one of my buddies, Seydou Traore, he's actually from London, England, and he actually is in the transfer portal right now out of Colorado. He played with the Arkansas State University last year. And just kind of like going to the States, I was able to not only kind of see that a lot of people have similar stories to like the ones that I've been covering, but also just kind of seeing that like there's not a lot of people in general around the world telling the stories of these athletes like in detail. And so I kind of went about, I guess, changing that kind of goal of telling like Canadian athlete stories to just telling athlete stories in general, and not really just limiting it to Canadians or people from Ottawa, because athletes in general, they need the kind of spotlight once in a while to not only be able to tell their story, but also to get that kind of help or like assistance from the media or marketing side, because like athletes are the biggest influencers in my opinion, and I think a lot of them don't really get the time of day from people in the media or from the marketing world to actually kind of build on their influence or kind of guide their influence in different ways, because they can have a real kind of like impact on not only like the world in like like the everyday life, like guys like LeBron, obviously, and like Patrick Mahomes, like those big names, like they can have an impact on the world. But like even like the smaller name guys that maybe you never have heard of, like their story could also make an impact on certain people. And just kind of like being able to kind of be impacted by certain athlete stories as well kind of taught me that. And just like taught me that like I should be telling like these athlete stories on also just a bigger scale. So it gave me bigger goals on like what I want to do in my future. Like right now, I'm kind of focused on creating more documentaries in my future, just because like I think storytelling is kind of one of my skills, and also I think it's one of my passions as well. Just being able to hear athlete stories and be inspired by them. I want to inspire others through their stories as well. So I think that's something that kind of going stateside and also just kind of being exposed to more athletes really taught me, and I think brought to kind of like my life and also like the light of Jay-Z Media as well.
This concept of impact, I think, is such an important thing that isn't talked about enough in sports or just in general. And I think one of the things that's so interesting about your story is the fact that you do focus on this. And I know from having seen a lot of your stuff that you talk about specifically within the scope of Ottawa, the athletes that have made an impact by having camps for kids or different programs that impact their community. It's so easy to get lost in the sauce of winning and losing, or is your team good? Is your team bad? Because from having worked in sports radio, when you really boil it down and listen to the general conversation that goes on every day, it really doesn't matter. And because of the fact that like sports fans as a whole have kind of been looped into this cycle of like making a mountain out of a molehill, that whenever you hear these stories of athletes making an impact, that it actually seems to be so mind-blowing, when in reality, like I'm sure you've discovered, a lot more athletes are making an impact and giving back than we see, because the stories just aren't really being told that much, because people just want to lose their mind over small nitty-bitty details that honestly don't really impact anyone like at all.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think it's been a problem also just in like the media side of sports, or I think media in general. They cover, I think, like just like the stories that they think will get kind of like money or clicks in a sense. Like the bigger, like I guess companies like the ESPNs, or I guess here in Canada would be like TSN, CTV, or like those kinds of, I guess, networks, for example. They would cover stories that would bring them revenue or get a lot of views and clicks on their websites or their TV channels. And I think they don't necessarily focus on the actual stories themselves, but maybe just kind of like how audiences might view them, or what will bring audiences to them instead. And I think that's where I have kind of differenced myself and kind of separated myself from other media people out there. And I think that might be a reason why certain athletes also like kind of gravitate towards like my platform and what I'm trying to create as well, because I think a lot of athletes have never really had the opportunity for a person from the media to actually come to them and say like, I want to tell your story. And like that's happened a couple times before for me, where like I talk to an athlete and like they're telling me about their story, and I say something about it, or like I mention how it's like inspiring, and like, do you have a documentary? Have you talked about your story? And like they sometimes say like, I've never really thought about doing that. I've never really thought about like my story being impactful. And like to me, I feel like that's kind of like a weird kind of thing, where it's like, why am I being impacted by the story if like he doesn't think his story is impactful type thing? But really it's just because like he's never really maybe had that opportunity to talk to somebody about his story formally, or like people didn't necessarily know his story to the full extent because it hadn't been exposed properly or something of that nature. And I think like that's something that I really want to work on, in the sports like realm, like just being able to help these athletes. Obviously, right now my niche is kind of football because like that's what I've known the most, but I'm willing to also work with athletes in other sports. Like here in Canada, obviously hockey is very popular. Basketball is getting a little more popular. Baseball is popular. Soccer as well. So, like I would love to work with athletes pretty much around the world and tell their stories in the future, just to really give them that equal chance to tell their story the best and I guess most intentional way possible as well. Because I think the intentions of telling your story is one of the most important parts of it, just kind of figuring out what you're telling and why you're telling it, because sometimes it could be, I guess, misunderstood in the media.
That's an interesting point. And I remember during the World Cup when this this is an argument I've heard go back and forth between people who are older and people who are younger. And the older people say, well, the media have the right to speak to athletes and ask them whatever questions they want because you're getting millions of dollars. You better answer the question. And this happened during the World Cup when Alphonso Davies only answered questions from the media outlets or something related to who are the rights holders. And then he left. And there was this big kerfuffle in CBC, and there was a journalist who was freaking out about it. And then it was on breakfast television. Sid Seixeiro was like, how dare he, like, it's like Alphonso Davies is just an athlete. He's not a prima donna. And the way that media paints the picture of him is so false. And I think that happens sometimes a little bit too in football or in maybe sports that we don't really stop to think about. But yeah, it's just, I don't know, like it really sucks that we forget the human elements behind athletes at times. And I think that while, yes, getting millions of dollars and answering a few questions doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, like I'm sure you've seen multiple examples of media asking dumb questions that are clearly them digging for an answer or a soundbite. And I think that Giannis's response to the reporter after the Bucks got knocked out in the first round was a very eloquent way of him showing the reporter what's up in terms of just trying to dig for a soundbite.
Yeah, for sure. Like I know, like I've seen it a lot, and just like here in Ottawa, for example, going to like press conferences and like just going to the average practice in the CFL too, just like the scrums with maybe the head coaches or like star players. Like there's always somebody in the media that is trying to like poke at an athlete or try to get something out of them. And like while like yes, it's their job to kind of get something out of them, like they can always shift the story a little bit. They don't have to tell the story that they were focused on telling, that they like could maybe figure out maybe a more positive story to tell in other words too. Just because I think like that's something that also like in all sports, like I feel like a lot of people just kind of forget that, like you said, like athletes are people too, and like actually humans. And like they get so caught up, like the media gets so caught up in like the statistics and like maybe like certain things that happen on the field or on the ice, on the court. And they often forget that like these are people that just do this like kind of like not necessarily on the side because it's like their profession and things like that, but it's like this isn't their like life. Like this is just something that they're doing in their life. Like a lot of athletes have like football players, for example, have mentioned like football is not who I am. Football is something I do. Like basketball players have said that too. Like LeBron James has like his more than an athlete like slogan and motto that he's created with his whole, I think, platform uninterrupted that he's kind of created as well. So like some things like in the media, like they often paint that picture that like these athletes, like being an athlete is all they kind of do. But I know like just getting to know athletes like off the side, like outside of their sports, like there's a lot more to these guys or girls that the media really portrays. And like that's kind of like what I want to showcase as well with my platform, not only telling their stories, but also kind of showing that like life outside of sports. And that's why I've done some day in the lives too. Like in the States, I did a few with some guys down there. One of them, I think, my favorite one so far was actually with Malik Straker. And he's actually somebody from Brampton, Ontario. He played a little bit of college ball here in Canada with Carleton. And he's now balling out at Arkansas State University. And he is probably one of the, I think, more intellectual people that I've ever talked to. He has always something new to kind of like inspire me with whenever I talk to him, or if I see something on his like Instagram or something like that. Like there's always something that is kind of like uplifting or kind of makes you think in different ways. And so I've done a couple of interviews with him last year, and then this year when I went to see him during spring ball. And I did a cool day in the life with him, and it kind of showed like his game day kind of routine during like their spring game this year. But like while everything is kind of like football related, because I only kind of got to film like football related stuff with him because I actually got there a little later. That was on me because I drove a little later. But I was able to cover like certain moments that he had with teammates and like staff members and people like that. And like it really got like that person aspect of like who this guy is and like how he interacts with his teammates. And like there's a couple like funny moments as well. And you kind of just, you see like that human in like that number 21 on the football field, and just kind of see that transition like during that day in the life. And I think like those are certain videos I want to kind of focus more on in the future, just to kind of do my part in the media side where I can actually benefit these athletes and actually like kind of make my impact. Because I feel like everybody is like set on making an impact or like everybody should be making some kind of impact. And I think like that should be my impact, I guess. And not saying that people should be doing what I do or anything like that, but I feel like everybody has kind of like a path that they're going on, and like they're going to make an impact. And I think that could be mine. And I hope I can do that in the next couple of years, like starting, obviously I've already started. So hopefully it can continue.
Yeah, man, it's just a constant theme, making an impact. And I think the hardest thing about it is that you don't always know exactly what it is that's going to impact people the most. And you can have intentions of what you want to be impacting others, but then there might be something that comes up you didn't expect that can actually impact others more than you'd think. So it's something that's very worth thinking about. It's very worth thinking about. What are the things that you're doing, and what are the ways in which it impacts somebody in some way, whether it's a group of 10 people or 5 people, it could be 100. I think that is a question that is always important to come back to at the end of the day, is like, what is it that I'm doing that's creating an impact in others, and what impact is this creating, a positive one or a negative one? Because like you said, and not to pick on Ottawa, but like, the last few years in the CFL, they've been like the worst team and they've really struggled. So like, I can't imagine how, whether the media there finds it annoying or not, going to every practice or every game and expecting the team to not be good or asking the same questions over and over. Like it's really difficult. Like I don't think it's fun for the fans, because then they get caught in this loop of doom. And for the players, it's probably super annoying because no one's tanking. No one's trying to throw games. They're all professional athletes. But at the end of the day, like, it's just the nature of the business that wins and losses matter. The CFL is a win now league. There's no real time for development. Quarterbacks come and go just like that. And the media don't care about unfortunately, I don't think the media really cares about what people do outside of the field unless it's just like a throwaway filler story or something like that. And I think that's one of the biggest things that really sucks about the reality of covering pro sports, at least from what we see in Canada. Uninterrupted, like you mentioned with LeBron, has caused for there to be a lot of positive change, and Canada has their own uninterrupted chapter, but I've only really seen it be exposed to like the Raptors or the NBA, and we haven't really seen much uninterrupted stuff related to CFL or other athletes from other sports, at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, for sure. Like we kind of talked about prior to actually like doing the podcast too, just like with how like the CFL or like even universities and just like how different like the media and I guess the marketing of it is here in Canada than it is in the States. I think like obviously like you'll see like differences with like the kinds of content too. Like in the States, like there's all kinds of content for certain sports, like football, for example, like the NCAA is huge. Like they're obviously one of the like it's like everything in like the down south. Like if you go to Alabama, there's no NFL team in the state of Alabama, and their NFL teams are Auburn and Alabama, and they have like huge fan bases that the whole state and the whole country really like loves like that Iron Bowl game, and it's even come to Canada, and like you see it in the CFL. You got so many Auburn players, and you got some guys from Alabama as well, and like there's certain like fan bases that are just so big, and like they have so many different media sources and different kinds of media. Like I know like they have media now for NCAA with NIL now being a thing where players are more like I guess active in the media where like they're talking more about what they do outside of their sports. And same with like the NFL, the NHL, NBA, MLB as well. And like any major sport in the States is really becoming more popular for like these kinds of things where like the athletes are getting the opportunities to talk outside of their sports. And I feel like the CFL is kind of like that last league to actually like kind of step in and like have their athletes do it. And I think a part of it is like budgeting and like not having the money because like or that might just be a mentality thing too where like they think they don't have the money for it but maybe they do. And I know a lot of players think that they definitely do have the money for it, and I would hope so as well. Or like maybe the CFL is in more like financial trouble than we all think they are. But I think like the CFL has a lot of interesting athletes here in Ottawa, like being able to get to know some of the players. Like there's a lot of guys that do really interesting things outside of football or have very interesting stories in football, but just haven't really got those opportunities to really tell their stories formally. And like I look to like change that a little bit, give certain athletes opportunities once in a while. And but I can only really do so much myself. Like there has to be other people out there doing the same kinds of things. But I think it's slowly gonna start like to change a little bit as like certain things get more popular with social media too, like different trends and things of that nature. Maybe I could even set a trend myself, but like we'll see about that. And I think like my goal is just to kind of help these athletes and not necessarily just in Ottawa, but elsewhere as well. Just be able to kind of put these athletes on the map while I put Jay-Z Media on the map as well.
Yeah, the CFL is, I think, one of the most unique leagues in the world because of that reason of having players be so closely connected to their fans, the community, and they're not just viewed as $1 million commodities like in the NFL or the rest of the major four leagues in North America. And that's what creates the interesting opportunity for the marketing side of things with CFL athletes is the fact that like they are involved in the cities, communities that they live in. A lot of them come from here, and that's something that shouldn't really be overlooked. I remember in 2013 it was that Brett Cameron, who is Bob Cameron's son, like one of the most legendary CFL punchers ever, was on the Bombers. Like the Winnipeg had signed him, and like it seemed like a huge opportunity because like his son was also pretty good, and he could have been on the team following his dad's footsteps. And they had, I remember them having an article about it, but that was it. And then he ended up getting cut and going to Saskatchewan. And then after that, nothing really came of it. And I was like, well, there's such an interesting opportunity there to talk about that family connection from like one of the most legendary players at his position in CFL history to his son following his footsteps. Like, I think there's an opportunity that the league has right now with the Philpott twins because their dad played in the league and was a pretty good player. And now that Tyson, who plays on Montreal, is wearing number 6, like his dad, like those connections are the things that need to be made in order for you to really enhance the level of storytelling. And also, I think it impacts the entertainment level as well. Because when you know the story behind the athlete, then it's not just a number on their jersey or whatever, right? Like, why is Drive to Survive so popular now in North America? No one gave two shits about fast race cars, like whatever, who cares? But then they released a Netflix special and boom, now everyone loves it and it's so addicting to watch because of the storytelling, right? So these opportunities exist. I think someone like yourself is just a pioneer in being able to find those gaps where you can tell the stories that not a lot of people are.
Yeah, for sure. Like just I think definitely just being able to tell the stories like that will hopefully impact a lot of things for like the viewership for leagues like the CFL or just like certain athletes in general being able to like tell your story. People will look at you differently and like view like your games differently as a whole. Like maybe they won't, like for example, like once you get to know a player, obviously when their team loses or something like that, like you're kind of bummed that they're going to lose or whatever. But like the overall kind of thing, whenever like, let's say one of your friends is on a team and like you're watching them play, you're more focused on their individual like goals and achievements that they're like achieving during the game than you are like their actual game itself. And I think that's something that maybe like if you had certain like stories being told, maybe like fans will look at games differently as well. Like, sure, they'll care about the end results and who's winning, who's losing, but like certain things will also be looked at differently. Like, whenever like somebody's coming back from an injury, like things of that nature, like this coming year, Jeremiah Mazzoli is coming back from a big like leg injury. Like, he'll be out for the next 2 games to start the season. But like once that third game, like he's going to be back on the field. It's going to be like almost a full year since pretty much a full year since he had played. So like that's a huge story and maybe a story that they missed telling because of like certain media like opportunities that I guess like the CFL and things like that, they just don't necessarily like look at telling full stories. Just like I feel like you said, the Tyson and Jalen Philpott twins are a great example of two guys that they can really focus on right now. And I think Canadian talent as a whole is something that they can focus on right now too, with like the amount of Canadians that are actually tearing up the CFL right now. Like you've got Canadian starters at almost every single position on the field. Last year we had Nathan Rourke tear it up, and that was a great story at quarterback. But like this year, like look at all the receivers. Like there's so many Canadian receivers now, and like that was almost like one of the weakest positions a couple of years ago for Canadians. So to be able to see kind of like those, I think, growths within like the game of football in Canada, and also like the transitions as well, just kind of, I feel like those are maybe things that they can focus on too, just kind of seeing like maybe why like certain positions are growing, like see like what kind of trainings maybe are now accessible and like coaching and things like that. Like talk about like grassroots stories as well, and kind of get into like the stories a little deeper than just saying like we have 5 Canadian receivers that are going over 1,000 yards or something like that. Like go more in depth with those stories and instead of just going through the statistics, because I feel like anybody can really look at the stat sheet and talk about the statistics.
Yeah, man, that's so well said because I think that is an area that the CFL does have, like they do have some of the right people in place to be big promoters of like the Canadian athletes in the CFL. And I know that although he's been around for a long time, but Glenn Suter is someone who I know that's been such a huge advocate for Canadians in football. And especially with what happened this offseason with SFU, that tons of alumni who played there, including him, Doug Brown, Angus Reid, lots of guys who were shocked by the decision. That was, I think, it was nice to see people unite over something that didn't really seem as significant. Like the SFU program seemed like a bit of an afterthought when you think about other Canadian universities because of the fact that they've struggled in the US. But then as soon as the program went away, then everyone rallied together because they know how important it is to have that program exist to give people opportunities to play on both sides of the border.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I hope like they're able to figure something out with the Simon Fraser program, of course, just because, like you mentioned, like the opportunity that you can have being an athlete there, being really anybody, a coach even there, you're going to a Canadian university and playing in the States. Like that's an awesome kind of, I guess, opportunity and I guess gig as a whole, just being able to kind of get that Canadian experience, but also play against maybe better athletes in the States. Or like I think with what we've seen already with like potential like schedules for this upcoming year where like they could play against both like countries, where they can play against like certain Canada West teams. And I think they even had some games against like Bishops and like I think even Ottawa U here in Ottawa too. And I think that would be like an interesting format because like I think you can't just like kill the program entirely. Like that's one thing that like people look at it and they might not think it's a big deal. Like I didn't necessarily think it would be a big deal right away, but then you start thinking of how many athletes there are on that team, how many athletes have come through that program, and how many athletes are on pace to go through that program, like that have committed to the university and things of that nature. Like it affects a lot of people, especially like the coaching staff as well. Like these are coaches that have really sacrificed a lot to get to where they are coaching at that level. Some of them might not be living with family because like we don't know like the necessarily like salaries for those kinds of jobs, but I'm sure like they're not necessarily the greatest. So like being able to have coaches that have sacrificed like maybe positions in their lives to be with that program, and then that program just like fold like that, and kind of with like no really warning either, because I think like the football team had no idea that it was ever going to happen. Like they thought it was kind of like a smooth running program for a little bit. Obviously they didn't have a lot of success on the field, but like they thought maybe it would still be like actual football team. So I'm hoping like they're able to figure something out there. And I think there's also been kind of like a lack of, I guess, media around that story itself, just kind of like the background of Simon Fraser and like the football team, like maybe some players that have come through the program. I think like that's also just something, maybe a reason why it would be folded, just because like not a lot of people knew necessarily about that program until like the news about it folding really came out. Because I find that program one of like very interesting just because of like that opportunity that I mentioned, being able to play in Canada and outside of Canada. And I think it would have been a great kind of like Last Chance U kind of documentary series for them, where you can tell the stories of Canadians and Americans on the team. And I'm sure there's Canadian and American coaches that are coaching on the team too, and get like their kind of, I guess, backstory and what it's like to be, I guess, living and playing in Canada, but then going across the border every once in a while to play your games and play against other like competition, and like what that kind of experience is like. And like you said about the F1 series, like maybe something like that could really like get people to watch maybe Simon Fraser University, Canadian University football in general, and maybe Canadian football in general too, because like that Last Chance U series a couple of years ago, or I guess that's a long time ago now at this point, where the first series came out. But like those kinds of series have really, I guess, brought light to certain like junior colleges, and I think JUCO in general. It's one of the more popular things now for guys to go the JUCO route after like maybe not getting a lot of great offers coming out of high school. And then you see a lot of great JUCO players tear it up in the NCAA and then make their jump to the NFL. And there's a lot of CFL players from that JUCO route too. Like I think it's Tim Bonner. He played with that Last Chance U team, and he was with the BC Lions last year. Not 100% sure where he's at this year, but I know he's still kicking it somewhere in the CFL. And like, there's a lot of success with those kinds of guys for sure. So I think like Simon Fraser is kind of like that JUCO route, and I think like they could definitely do something with that team if it ends up really, I guess, happening again, if they do get a season this year and get that program up and running. And I hope like they're able to figure something out, because I find it interesting for sure.
Just before we go here, if you were to give advice to someone who is in their 20s and is feeling a bit lost or uncertain about the path they're taking in life, what advice would you give them and why?
So somebody in their 20s, I hope you guys would understand that I am not 20 and still listen to what I'm saying, because I'm only 18. But I would say that really anybody in any field going along their path, the generic response is just keep going. I feel like that's kind of said a lot by so many different people. But really, I think there would be keep going, just like the generic one. But then I would also say separate yourself, figure out what it is that, like, obviously, like if you're on a path, like you kind of know what you're doing to a certain extent, like, you know, like your talents, you know, your passions, you know, what you want to do in your future. But figure out what it is that you're doing that is different than everybody else that is doing what you want to do, and focus on that a little bit more than maybe you had in mind. Because at the end of the day, like, there are so many people, there's like 8 billion people, I think, like around, like on the planet, and everybody has a dream, everybody has like some kind of like passion, and a lot of people share passions, and they share dreams, and they share like certain interests. So like your obvious, like your dream is very like important, but I know a lot of other people probably have that same dream as yours and have the same talents as yours. So it's more of figuring out what you're doing that can be different than that person next to you that has the same dream and same aspirations as you. And if you can perfect that and really kind of display that as much as possible, I think that might be your strongest, like, I guess, your strong suit. Because like for myself, for example, like I've kind of noticed that what is different with me than other people out there, obviously my age, but you also have like that willingness to kind of get to know the athletes and my intentions with these stories that I'm telling. I think it's more of my intentions that I feel is different than everybody else around me, because a lot of people, they just want to kind of do it because they see maybe potential money in the sports media industry. They see the opportunities, like being able to, you know, watch football for like a living or whatever. But I see like that impact and like my intentions behind like what I want to do. So figure out what your intentions are and figure out what really separates you from everybody else, and kind of, I guess, like that's kind of it, really. Just figure out that and then keep going along your path, stay patient. I have actually quotes of the day on my Instagram stories. So if you're ever, I guess, feeling lost, you can always just tap into my Instagram stories. It's on my main account, which is JZ_terror. JZmedia.ca is my my like business account for JZ Media. But yeah, I post daily stories. It's Jay-Z's quotes of the day, and I've been posting. I just got back to it on Monday. Post daily quotes. I did it a lot in Memphis because we had a whiteboard in our office. Shout out Landon and Tyler for like always getting me on to do like the quotes of the day. And I think like that's something that I think a lot of people have actually liked the quotes of the day. Like I get messages every single day about them, and I think it's something if people are kind of stuck in their journey, they can tap in. It's usually about just keep going, staying patient, and kind of like inspiring quotes. So just check those out, and I guess keep going, figure out what you do best than everybody else, and keep along your path. And I think everybody will have a great story, and maybe I can tell your story if you're an athlete or somebody in the sports for sure.
Amazing advice, man. The quotes of the day are always a fantastic read. For anyone who hasn't yet gone to check it out, please go and check out his Instagram stories at JZ_Terror. Because the quote of the day will never disappoint. That's for sure. I love whenever I see them, man. It is always inspiring. And yeah, it doesn't matter your age. I think the message of staying consistent with something that you feel strongly about and you know that makes yourself different is, sometimes it may sound obvious, but if it really was that obvious, then people wouldn't need to keep hearing it, So I concur with that 100%.
Yeah, for sure. And the quotes of the day, I know some people have issues with my handwriting. I know it's a little messy at times, but hopefully everybody can read them whenever they do get to the seeing the quotes of the day.
Man, I appreciate you being able to be on the pod. It was super fun getting to chat, get to explore, learning more about making an impact with athletes, telling stories that are unique and different, and learning how to forge your own path, because it's not an easy thing what you've been doing, man. So I want to acknowledge you for all the trailblazing you've done for the next generation, because people don't believe something is possible until they see someone like themselves do it.
Appreciate it very much. Appreciate you having me, and yeah, looking forward to maybe getting on here again at some point.